Welcome to Recombination Nation. Today I'm talking with Bunya Halasz. He is from Growing Roots Permaculture in subtropical northern New South Wales, an area that's fairly similar in climate to where I am here in slightly warmer Queensland. And he's a very good friend of a friend of mine, Revel Saw, who I've interviewed in the past, and he comes recommended. And I don't know exactly where this conversation is going to take us. I'm keen to explore everything that been working on throughout his life, and particularly where did the first name Bunya come from? So maybe start out by telling us a bit about who you are and the path that you've taken in life to lead you into experimental agriculture.
Okay, starting with the name. All right, straight up. Okay, so I actually my nickname Banya. It comes from it stems back to maybe late 90s. I was at that stage living mostly. Well, I kind of grew up out Hawkesbury Way, west of Sydney, which sort of was very much the rural area of Sydney at the time, sort of transitioning to um, extended kind of housing estates, I suppose, on that sort of frontier. But I grew up between there and southern New South Wales, and also had a stint studying in Canberra, actually, at university. So a lot of the early part of my life was in that region, and I always had a kind of, I guess like many people, had a kind of a passion and a curiosity to want to explore more hot and humid tropical climates. But there's little fragments of rainforest and many fragments of rainforest plants that are grown and planted around the region. And I mean, classically, since their discovery in the sort of, 1800s, bunya pines suddenly got planted everywhere around the globe.
Mm.
Like, it just
Hmm.
became this, that they just got spread around. And so many of the beautiful spaces of a lot of the colonized parts of Australia, some of the epic old homesteads and just extraordinary places are often marked by these bunya pines. And so they've been a real feature of the landscape in my life. And as I got more and more interested in foraging and in local foods, and particularly in native bush tucker, um, I kept on coming across them more in my travels, and I was always looking and trying to learn in that area. When do I predict these to fall? When are they around? And how do I cook them? What do I do with them? So I'd always sort of be out hunting them. And being a gardener from very young, whenever I got stashes of seeds, I was always planting them and growing them in different areas, potting some up, others just sort of like bush planting or rogue planting on roadsides and things like this. And in the course of doing a lot of that in my activities, as I kind of moved around in that area, I shared that with more and more people. I guess I was sharing more about the plant, getting others to tune into recognizing them, tuning into when they're on. It's quite interesting in the southern area of where they're grown outside of the subtropics. When you go into the western slopes and inland, cooler and drier, they come on quite a lot later.
Mm.
So, but anyway, I was always trying to tune into when they're on and when to anticipate when they're on, and had a had an interesting period of my life, which myself and a few friends were just leaving what we were doing and moving into an unknown realm of what we're doing, and we traveled down to the south coast and ended up camping out and having a whole bunch of fortuitous, amazing things coming together at that time. And I think I'm just starting to ramble now, but uh, ultimately came to a place of feeling like I didn't identify so much with my cultural identity or my birth name so much at the time. I was identifying with life forces that I engaged with and connected with. And that was one that kept on coming up. And so when I connected with this group of friends who were all leaving different parts of their lives and were sharing what we were connecting with and engaging with, that came up as something that my friends started to call me.
Ah.
And that continued on for a summer of sort of traveling around a little bit while I was not so grounded in ongoing practice of growing or studying and things that I was doing. I was moving around through the summer, going to festivals. I kept on getting introduced by this group of friends to people as Bunya.
Hmm.
And that nickname just took off. And so many people started to call me that. And I actually had some really interesting journeys when I moved to Brisbane, where I realized I was moving into an area, a homeland, where this tree is a really sacred and powerful symbol. And I've been carrying that name for some time outside of that homeland. And I had a bit of a period where I really didn't want to carry that name. I was really shy of that name, particularly around Indigenous people, of being introduced or introducing myself with that name, and had quite an interesting journey of coming to still wear that name, because I had a period of really not wanting to, connecting with some of the Cubby Cubby and Waka Waka crew when I moved to southeast Queensland, which is going back about 20 years. Um, I talked to a few different elders about this story and how I came to carry that name, and in a way of sort of seeking I guess an awareness that there was some sort of bizarre cultural appropriation going on, of sort of an anglicized, bastardized name of Bonyi Bonyi, the a very sacred tree and powerful symbol of gathering and everything that the Bonyi Bonyi is to Waka Waka and Cubby Cubby people. Ceremonial tree and such a life-giving tree. Uh, I came to, through a few different chats with different elders, came to become really comfortable with sitting with that anglicized version of that name. And I haven't had so much, I don't know, ambivalence or shyness around it since. It occasionally still comes up, but ultimately it's a name that people keep on calling me and has just become attached to me. And I don't think I've got any say in it anymore.
It reminds me of like a pre-industrial tradition of giving people nicknames that I think it's preserved in Australia more than in our original Anglo culture. Like it's a very old tradition now that I think about it, has hung on in Australia, and it's the kind of thing. A nickname has to be given to you by someone else that knows you. If you rename yourself, it's a totally different dynamic.
Yeah, that's sort of what it was. There was a feeling of going, oh, like, do I want to carry this myself? I've sort of been given this by a group of friends. It was sort of in, it wasn't in jest. It was in fun and reverence, because, when we shared some of these stories at this time, it was like I was really recognizing a totemic relationship to that tree and the life force.
Mm, mm.
Um, and those guys picked up on that and wanted to keep running with that for me. And I guess they're reminding me of that. Um, but it's interesting because there is an incredible deep reverence. There's so much about that tree and its ancientness and its ability to endure the couple of 100 million years, however long
Mm.
that incredible life force has continued throughout the changes of this continent, not just this continent, but the whole many of the southern continents, through the Pacific Islands, through to South America. There are areas that have remained there.
Yeah, they're older than Australia.
Yeah, yeah. They are like they're not just survival strategy, their strategy to thrive, which seems to be some kind of a way of being extremely slow and precise in their actions and timing. It's not about they're not in some rush to suddenly do something rapidly or quickly. Everything is slow and timely, and I get this sense that they're tuned into a much deeper life force than I have any sense of understanding, a much deeper sense of cycle and rhythm that
Well,
seems.
I wanted to ask you about that, and I normally save dipping into the woo a bit later in the conversation, but there's something, tell me if you agree, but there's something about the vibe or the energy of a bunya tree where it's almost like they don't notice you. Like
Mm,
other plants seem more reactive to humans being around them, and the bunions are just like, oh, these things just turned up 5 seconds ago, and they haven't really turned their gaze towards us yet. Would you
yeah,
agree that there's something strange about them like that?
yeah, it's interesting. I get that a sense of that. I get a sense of an attitude, and I can see that a sense of like sort of shrugging off what goes on around. Like they see so much. It's like the water off a duck's back or something.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
go by. It's like, yeah, unconcerned. Maybe a bit like the Ents in the Lord of the Rings story. You know,
Yes,
this
yes.
low life force that they represent that seems to be, yeah. The rest of the affairs seem trivial. But
They
you
got
know,
they
I
got
guess,
their eyes on a different time horizon than us.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely agree with that. Although, you know, having said that, you know, seeing a lot of the die-off happening recently and stuff, almost a bit like the Ent story, like maybe they're having to come to recognize the forces that are going on around them and are being
Mm,
affected by them. Yeah,
mm,
in a
mm,
kind of a
mm.
new way. Yeah.
No, we should probably jump into the first section I like to talk about, the plants, the particular kinds of plants that you work with the most. And I usually talk to people who do like breeding of crops in various degrees. Do you do plant breeding, or are you working in a different capacity?
Well, I think I think my plant breeding is about the pace of the ants, actually. I think now that we're talking ants. But I was just thinking about on the way here, I was just like, my plant breeding is definitely more based on a community, like this sort of this community of organisms
Mm,
and how they relate to one another is more important than breeding any one particular line. That's sort of how it is for me. So whilst I do some just, you know, classic and standard seed saving procedures on a bunch of different annual plants, and I kind of select those that exhibit the most vigor in my systems, be it something simple like Italian parsley or purple mizuna that I grow in winter, saving pumpkin or corn seeds and various things. There are some individual lines that I do some sort of classic seed saving with, but what I'm most interested in really, and what excites me the most, and what I think I've probably done the most development in, is actually just bringing in lots of genetics to very diverse systems in processes of succession, and giving those genetics a space to kind of work out what's working best in this system at this time of year, letting a bit of rewilding happen in many
mm,
ways. So,
mm,
as an example, a bunch of us brought in many chili varieties, probably about 40 chili varieties at one stage to uh, uh, an agricultural ecosystem I'm still working in. The majority of those were brought in by my friend Evan, who was an annual market gardener at the time. I brought in a whole bunch as well. Most of them were milder varieties. Many of the ones he got I'd never heard of before. Some of them had come from the States and Mexico, and chili varieties I wasn't familiar with, being growing up outside of that sort of American chili world, you know,
mm.
of the Americas. I've sort of most more of the sort of Southeast Asian varieties, and but bring in a whole huge range. And then the big selection criteria that was going on for them when we planted them in early succession, many of them in young tree lines with bananas and sort of syntropic style intensity plantings, some of them in interrows within those. But ultimately, as that system has evolved fairly rapidly with succession, what we're left with is the ones that are staying later in succession and are perhaps a lower strata, have lower sunlight needs, and are working better within the complexity of, you know, really diverse root systems in a strong, you know, a strong evolution of succession, and the ones that just keep surviving and showing up that I collect the seed from, I often just scatter to various places. Sometimes I throw them in pots whenever I'm raising fruit trees. I collect my chili seeds and I put them in different pots, and they sort of become companions to those slower growing fruit trees, and they end up getting planted out with them.
Hmm.
So I just sort of end up, you know, collecting the genetics that are surviving best in that evolving, complex, diverse ecology. And some of them I'm working out are clearly wanting to work more on the fringes, on the edge of that, or in the new early successions in open ground. So
Mm, mm,
there's like all the ones that have evolved from the sort of classic cayenne varieties, and there's also this ají amarillo, the yellow Peruvian chili I've been growing. There's a
mm,
few of them that I know really like that sort of more light edge And so I consciously keep taking to there, and I just keep selecting those that are working better. But there's many other varieties that are working well in those low light conditions. And so I basically just try and act as an agent to kind of keep on spreading the successful genes into a diverse range of areas to learn from them and to give them a chance to evolve with complexity rather than what's often classically evolving with plant selection on a especially on larger scale of kind of creating supposed ideal conditions for that plant, often quite simplified, planting lots of them, doing big selections and roguing out. That goes on to a degree, but mostly I'm just sort of letting the evolving ecosystem rogue out those that don't belong anymore.
I mean,
So yeah,
you bring up a really
that's kind of
interesting
the
question because yeah, often the more focused or determined plant breeders will put a whole lot of genetic diversity in a big block, and then just start hammering away at negative and positive selection of things that they do and don't like, and it's a whole other world when you're doing polycropping, like when you're mixing different species together, because the context that those traits have to perform in is so different. I mean, even you see people saying, "Oh, three sisters, you just grow corn and beans and squash together," but which varieties are the ones in your particular conditions that will work with each other? And then you've got all the complexity about how you space them and manage them and time them and harvest them. There's, I mean, it's not surprising that people often retreat just to planting a monoculture of something and then
yeah.
not having to deal with those, thousand other variables.
That's right. Yeah, the complexity can be baffling, and it's sort of it's a strong commitment, and it's also a commitment to letting go to the mystery, like not needing to know, not needing to control too much in a way is where it's
Mm.
at for me. There's a sort of a bigger again, there's a bigger cycle at play that I'm playing a part of, but I'm not taking that agency as the major driver of that.
So
Um,
if you already had an established multi-species system and you wanted to introduce a new crop into it and you had access to like a reasonable amount of diversity, how would you generally go about that? Like what would your strategy be?
Well, I mean, most important thing is for me is the vast majority of situations, unless it's a very later succession crop like something like cacao or generally the number one thing is to make a really significant disturbance within that system,
Mm.
provide an opportunity for a new organism to enter. That would be the first thing. And obviously, as much as I could know about that crop's needs around its light requirements, its ability to tolerate humidity, or conversely, its need for airflow in our climate, particularly if it was a wet season crop. So learning as much as I could around the what I understand is the home climate or the comfort zone of that plant, and doing my best to create that within the system, and then allowing the system itself to come back in and start to engage with it, and then to observe how it then starts to engage with that system. But absolutely, number one, I think would really be a big disturbance.
Hmm.
Yeah, significant disturbance to try and yeah create an opening in the space for them to begin with.
Interesting. Oh,
Yeah.
again, another question. Like, would you typically plant like 10 varieties of a crop all at once, scattered through a diverse system like that in the same year? Or would you like continually introduce one or two over multiple years and give them, not expect them to prove themselves straight away up against the competition?
Yeah, well, look, I have to say, look, and interesting, the context is really important for this because I think if you're kind of a passionate sort of backyard plant breeder, um, it's really tempting to bring lots in at once and sort of do an epic experiment. But in the context of most of my planting is of enough of a scale that it's needs to be somewhat commercial. Like
Hmm.
I'm renting land. I sort of need to get returns on the efforts I put in. I'm not just a backyard grower kind of playing on my backyard as a little experiment. Like I'm
Mm.
kind of like needing to get returns from crops. And having said that, most importantly, I don't make it my sole and only income just to like grow fresh food, because that's like, to me, that's like really enslaving myself, and it doesn't give me much room to experiment and play.
Mm.
I respect any grower that makes the majority or the whole of their income as primary production, but I know that in doing that process, you tend to become very risk averse, and by absolute necessity, just by survival.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so but I tend to work more with the latter of what you shared. It's sort of like grow a main bulk of crops and genetics that work well for me, and introduce a few more each time to just sort of bring some new genes slowly into the system. Um, that's a safer approach if you're wanting to maintain a reasonable level of production or consistency of production.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
but yeah, both are really valid and both are really important. So, like in the case of the chilies, we did it that way. We just did this big boom. But I would say for most of my crops, just by default, that I'm in a cycle of doing what I do, selecting crops, or continuing to plant in certain ways and certain combinations that I've been used to planting. And usually, what happens to me, I'm not out there hunting heaps of crops at the moment. Usually, new things come to me now and then as a little gift, or I stumble upon something. So by default, I just have a few new things I bring in now and then. Whereas in the early days, I was really consciously bringing in heaps of stuff and doing those big kind of bold, genetic recombinations. So yeah, I think context is important, and they're both really valuable approaches.
This is a question I've been asking people, and I've been wondering about it too. From the plant's perspective, and a touch of woo here as well, do you think those mass trials where you put 20 different varieties in the ring and let them duke it out, do you think the plants feel different compared to just one coming in at a time and you're hoping and you're giving it some love and attention and wanting it to show its best versus, the knockout death match that you can do as a normal variety trial?
Yeah, look, to be honest, yeah, I like to. There is a difference of energy, and again, I think there's place for both of them. I quite like. I tend to like say for instance, some of I do feel a little bit like some of the modern certainly within Australia anyway, and I don't know how broad this context is, but it seems to be fairly broadly spoken in the sort of syntropic circles around. It's sort of like what I feel like some people interpret kind of naively is this sense of like it's all cooperation and competition doesn't exist. I get this sort of dogma sort of through that school sometimes at me, and it kind of really riles me up, because I really feel like they're equally important forces, competition and
Mm,
cooperation, or nurture and challenge. I think they're both really valuable forces, and I think that most human beings are made up of the complexity of those forces. And I feel like it's really important that the life forces that I engage with and the foods that I eat are also uh, are also exposed to those different forces. So
hmm
I think just in order to grow most of these crops, we have to provide some degree of nurture and intention and support for them, and often that involves decimating the habitat of something else to be able to grow one of these new crops. So we're sort of part of that process of creating this disturbance and an aggressive energy in a way that often starts a lot of these gardens, or a lot of these plants journeys, is often a very aggressive kind of a attitude towards the environment, but ultimately we then usually take on as a custodian a nurturing role. But
Yeah.
they're such equally important forces, and I definitely feel like, look, I have been to gardens and growers that seem to have this incredibly like peaceful and loving energy that they give to their plants, and I feel the thriving that happens within that,
Mm.
and I can feel that. I do tend to be a bit rougher and readier with my plants, partly because I manage quite large areas in multiple different sites, and I just don't have the time and energy to be micromanaging or over nurturing things. So I do probably tend to select stuff a bit more through sort of rough and ready means, where they've got to battle a little bit more for themselves.
Mm.
But ultimately, I feel like it is actually a balance of both of those that really creates not just a healthy crop, but a really healthy relationship with that ecosystem, and ultimately a really healthy food. Because I really feel like in being you are what you eat, like I'm really into having, nutrient dense, healthy, beautiful, delicious, and delicate foods. But if they don't have this sense of life force where they're kind of rough and ready and able to kind of cope with a few knocks in the tough world that we live in, I don't really want to imbibe that life force. Like I sort of
Mm.
also want life force that's got that vigor and that sense of hardiness to it.
I'm also curious about how you approach selection, um, growing in such a variable climate year to year. I mean, we both go through El Nino cycles and all the other things that get thrown at us in Australia. And how do you approach that? Because I think if you only looked at the results from like one year, you could miss out on really useful traits at like the other extreme.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's huge. And look, like some of the so for instance, my I tend to find like the dry period we've just been through has been such an epic time to like, you know, process seeds and like dry
Mm.
garlic. And we've just had this beautiful window of consistent dry weather up till this last week. Um, and those are just gold and magic when you get them. But as you said, like I can never predict when they're going to be in this climate. And over the last 5 years, you really have to choose your moment well and back yourself that you're actually going to get a period like that to be. And so, like, I lost vast amounts of seed because I'm often like say this time of year for winter annuals, like coming into September, October, even into early November, just vast amounts of seeding going on, and
Mm.
so I want to collect lots of seed. I want lots of seed because I'm doing this roguing and I'm letting them be a bit rough and ready. I want to sow lots of seed, so I want big volumes of it, and it's quite a big process to collect and store lots of seed. And so often I'm collecting heaps at the moment. I'm shoving things into bags or kind of slightly aerated containers and storing them in various spots. And I'm just absolutely praying and hoping that like rats don't eat them all, that the humidity isn't so consistent that you lose heaps of it to mold. And I'm often just not getting around in time to be able to harvest them and clean them to the level where they're really safe to store. So I'm sure you must be going through this too. You must have gone through your fair share of this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think we've all had disasters where we scale up the scale of processing, and then suddenly we find there's like mold in the bottom of the bucket because it's
Oh,
just your methods don't work if you just increase it by a factor of two.
absolutely. And look, I think this is a bottlenecking that goes on in these events. The things that survive from that events are absolutely the things we want to be evolving with.
Mm.
So there actually is a real gift to those big events. And the main thing is, again, it's like having scale, like collecting enough that you can afford to lose vast amounts. And also the odd rogue that, like, I mean, for me, the most valuable one is the one that survives in the ground.
Yeah.
Like the self-seeded ones, the small patch that's self-seeded. I'm actually much happier to work with them than the ones I save. The ones I save are often actually for seeding new projects or new early stages of succession. The ones I really want are the ones that find their own way and show me where they want to be, when they want to come up. Like that's actually the real gold. So I need to make sure there's plenty of seeds still out in the field. And I want to be able to collect enough to make sure I've got some to start new projects. And yeah, you need that huge volume to be able to survive potential bottleneck episodes.
Do you have any crops that you avoid saving, like storing the seed if you can? Like you just sow it pretty much straight away?
Um, Well, look, I guess the ones that find look, I should actually step back from that and actually say the ones I like the most, the ones that don't require me at all. Um, so like being in a similar environment to you, I'm sure, and maybe you like me, and a huge portion of the Australian population has been brought up in a very Eurocentric kind of a
Mm.
food worldview, and and for me, one of my biggest journeys 20 years ago, moving into more humid subtropics from more of a sort of temperate environment, was embracing and learning those, and loving that in the some of those cooler months I can grow some of those sort of more European vegetables and some of the more familiar tastes from my childhood and some more my family tradition of food. But what I really love is learning all of the plants that just thrive and rewild themselves so well in this environment. And one of the things I've certainly experienced is that incredibly so many herbs from like Japan do so well in this climate and
Hmm.
actually rewild themselves really well and don't require me to be whatsoever a part of their system. So like things like shiso, things like mitsuba, in the wintertime, certainly, Mizuna as well. Um, Daikon's one of the more challenging ones for me for saving seed, partly just because they're finicky to sort of bust them all open. They don't shatter and explode well, and they're
Mm.
easy to collect. But I guess what interests me the most, and what I'm really most importantly moving towards, is the ones that not that I avoid because they're too hard, but that I don't do because I realize I don't need to. They just find their way. And again, that's the life force that I really want to be imbibing and working with and crafting my whole culinary world around, you know? So I should go back to your question because I feel like you asked something I didn't answer, but I got sidetracked on what I wanted to
Oh, no,
share.
no, no, you answered it perfectly. That there's some in a humid climate, there's a lot of varieties that grow easily enough, but storing the seed can be challenging. I mean, for capsicum, chilies, for example,
Oh, yeah.
I can dry and store them, but I they do much better if I just plant them straight from the fruit.
Right. Yes. Gotcha. Yeah, they absolutely do too. So yeah, for me, papayas and chilies are definitely both two of those. I like to plant straight from the fruit. And again, like the way I like to plant them is just thinking ahead and going, if they're not going to be ready to pop straight away, which is often the case with those two, like a late crop of chilies and by the time the pawpaws are ripe and got ripe fruit, they're very rarely ready to pop straight away. But I want to get them in the soil straight away. So I just think ahead to where do I want them popping up next September, October, November, and I just scatter them there.
Mm.
And I make sure I follow up with the appropriate disturbance if I didn't make it straight away then, to use them later on. So those are definitely ones. I would say, I mean, most of the more tropical, fleshy fruited stuff, uh, I don't bother a lot with drying seed in this climate. Like if it's a wet seed, I just rather would get it straight in unless there's very few reasons I really need to. Like tamarillos, papayas, chilies, most of that stuff, I just want to plant fresh. Even leave a bit of gunk with them, ideally, so that they've got their own fruit to ferment with them.
Mm.
And I really mostly just work on seeds that dry seeds that usually have a dormant period or have a seasonality about them that require that storage that I actually give a bit more attention to.
Have you seen any plants naturalize more effectively when you mix different strains together and just let them cross-pollinate?
That's a good question. I would say, as a general rule, yes. There's going to be more survival. But again, there's that question as to whether you get the traits you're after.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, like I said, coming back to where we were sharing before, I tend to be more inclined to probably be a lot more conservative than a lot of rewilding seed savers, where I'm more likely to roll with strains that are working and bring in small amounts. But I have no doubt that by bringing in more genes for the vast majority of situations, I'd be fast tracking their ecological evolution and their adaptation to the site.
Mm.
And
But you have to be prepared to steer that explosion, or
yeah,
they could become so wild or weedy that they're not actually as useful.
yeah, I guess again that's context. Like if you're the mad experimenter and you're doing it for the joy of doing that, like do it. But if you're trying to get a more consistent crop and a little bit of an outcome, um, it's safer to go slower,
Mm.
in my opinion. Um, yeah, but look, I would say I'm sure in the vast majority of situations, bringing in more genetics is going to be favoring the vigor of that crop.
Mm.
Uh, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, are there situations where it wouldn't? I guess is probably another question. Um, I mean, I guess there could be a degree of hybridization that could go on that could be um, so dramatic if there's actually, such a large diversity of genetics that there's multiple different species involved are able to cross pollinate that could make it, like you say, so difficult to um, to find the gold in that patch and to stabilize genetics of what you want, that it might be just a wild ride to steer, I suppose, that
Hmm.
that isn't worth the energy, I guess is what it comes down to. I
Yep,
mean,
yep,
on some level, you've got to get an energy repayment for doing all that work. And
absolutely, yeah, yeah.
and if you have a lifestyle where you've got whatever, you have your material needs covered, and you've got more than enough time to play that game, then the more people playing that game, the better. I think that's great.
Mm. Do you have any thoughts on Australian growers' access to genetic diversity and how that's changed over time? Because you've been in this game for probably about as long as I have, and I have vague memories like back in, well, I was a kid in the 80s, but I've become aware that there were pretty much no restrictions to bringing seed in from overseas, and now it's getting harder and harder as time goes on. Have we kind of been disconnected from the world? Is our little island drifting away from everyone else again?
Yeah, well, quite possibly, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I guess like I guess a lot of that stuff's been brought in just by people's little travels overseas, and bringing their little sneaky bits back in. And there's certainly a lot less of that going on. There's a lot bigger fines for people that do play that game these days. It's a lot harder to do it, and there's few people that are going through the whole legal route of all the quarantines. So yeah, in a way, I guess we've had the doors shut on a lot of things. And yeah, and I guess that's got its problems a bit, but it's also like a lot of things that we've got a lot of genes for. It's kind of okay that they get a chance to express themselves in a unique way in this continent as well, or in this place as
Mm.
well. And
Hmm.
I guess that sense of just under for me, the understanding and the recognition that those what's the term I'm after, like those random mutations that are thrown up are an extraordinary gift, and we don't always need to get our genetics from outside of sight if we keep on providing I guess coming back to what I was sharing before around that environment of a mix of sort of nurture and challenge that allows genetics to express something new.
Mm.
Um, so I don't think it's necessarily. I mean, I'm probably more of an advocate for, yes, it'd be great to bring in more. It'd be great to have more diversity and keep stirring the pot more. Um, but I think it's also an interesting opportunity to just, yeah, like work more with what we've got and
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah. I see where you're coming from. And all of the diversity in the world is of no use if you don't have a context and attention and selection. Like having a million varieties of something in a seed bank somewhere almost may as well not exist if it's not actually in the community being grown in a way that's making it fit in that context.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely agree. And I think like, and the interesting thing is that, like we're aware that, the phenotype, the expression, like, obviously there's the genetics and then there's the expression of those genes and
Mm.
how the environment that organism's in, how that switches on or off some of those genes to bring about certain traits. A big part of that environment is not just the soil type we're in and the climate and the rainfall. A big part of that environment, inverted commas, is the management regime that the grower is tending that crop within. And I think that there's a lot of gold just in that, in how we tend that crop to bring about something new or something unique within that crop.
Hmm.
That those same seeds, if we just do continue to plant on whatever large scale monoculture or small scale monoculture plots in regularly tilled soil that have got consistent amounts of compost or chicken manure out every year, and in a particular routine schedule, rather than one, like I said, that I'm really interested in, is the genetics that evolve with complexity and diversity and really complex dynamics. I think that's just really exciting what can come from those, and I don't think that's it's obviously not a focus of mainstream seed saving or commercial seed saving. That they've got other constraints around their sort of labor and time and economics. But I think for the growing number of people that have got their little diverse home or small scale kind of food forests and really mega diverse areas, I think there's all sorts of exciting stuff that's going to evolve just out of what we've got if we just keep playing the game with the same genetics. And I think, you know, and it is an important, I think it's an important interface between, you know, production and having the little Noah's Ark, because obviously mainstream producers and market gardeners really don't have a lot of choice economically, but to often just buy good seedlings from really good seedling growers, and hopefully they're organic or biodynamic, as we have access to in the region, which is great, or direct seeding stuff that they bought from the same place, and often not saving their seed, often not. Most commercial growers don't have anywhere near the opportunity to do anything like
Mm.
selection on site. They're just absolutely pressed by the market forces to just keep churning out food and ripping out the bed and starting again, you know. So I think I guess what I work in, what I'm really excited about are the systems that are focused on food production and trying to get some kind of uh, um, a consistency in that, or a reliability in that, and but just making those little changes, and the little changes over time can be profound, and
Hmm.
maybe not even visually creating a massive and new variety, but really stabilizing some really awesome genetics that's engaging in a new diverse soil ecology and in a multi-strata system. So yeah, I think it's just, what's way more important is just giving the genetics we have more opportunity for unique ways to express themselves.
Hmm. I love that angle. Now, I really want to talk to you about your perspective on the potential for Bunya to, and I often use the word domestication. This is kind of my big dream, is to domesticate Bunyas, but even I use that word with like inverted commas around it because I don't think it's a simple black and white. Yes, it's domesticated. No, it's not. And particularly for Bunya, I see its potential as being something that is in a deeper relationship with humans, but it isn't like, growing in a pot on somebody's office desk to like, make a nut for their breakfast. Um, I see it as being a bridge to the wild, basically. And yeah, particularly your experience with the indigenous communities and how it's used in your landscape and your relationship with it. I would just love to hear your perspective on what you think the opportunities and the challenges might be with trying to deepen that relationship.
So yeah, so when you say to domesticate it more, do you mean become a greater agent in its active,
Exactly. Yes,
yeah,
to develop a
active
closer
selection?
interdependency.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like it's an interesting one because I think, yeah, it is a funny one for me because for me, I actually do have I probably have a lot less hands-on relationship to it, because you're doing some trials where you've also got the South American araucarias, yeah, and
Hmm. Hmm.
you're giving them the opportunity to potentially cross-pollinate.
That's the aim. And it has been done before, but I'm just going to try and do it on a mega diverse basis using remnant trees from all around my area to add to the population that I'm mixing up.
So, I don't know, it mightn't be what your viewers are going to want to hear, but I actually want to hear more about what you're doing because you're on the absolute cutting edge of that. I've done nothing like that. So I'm
Hmm.
actually really interested if you want to give a brief synopsis
Yeah,
of.
yeah. It's probably been a while since I've talked about it, so I might have some new people in the audience. So yeah, basically, I'm in the middle of the center of distribution for Bunya nut. So there's remnant trees scattered around all over the place, like 150-year-old trees in little tiny pockets that didn't get logged, and they have extreme diversity in visual traits, and there's probably a whole lot more genetic diversity that you can't see with your eyes. And my theory is basically, if you look around those trees, they're not reproducing anymore. There's no seedlings that are forming under them because the
Mm,
ecosystem's changed and the populations are too fragmented. Who knows what? So my aim is basically to gather up as much of that genetics before it's lost, grow it in a dedicated space on my farm, and hopefully in the future other people's properties as well. So it's not all the eggs in one basket. And I also am hoping to cross that hyperdiverse bunya population with a South American relative called the piranha pine that drifted off in Gondwana land when it broke off. I think it's 50 million years ago it split off. And this species from South America grows a little bit faster, but it also produces large edible nuts. And I'm hoping from that highly diverse hybrid population that a kind of Bunya 2.0 will emerge, that I'll reunite those sides of the family tree and create something that humans are able to have a more intensive relationship with, that we will have an incentive to plant it and manage it and interact with it over a larger portion of the landscape. And bunjas, if people don't know, they grow all the way from the tropics in Australia. There's a little tiny population of them near Cairns. And there's people who are growing them successfully all the way down in Victoria in like cool temperate areas. And if you added in the monkey puzzle tree, you could go to places that had heavy snowfall. So this is a crop that you could grow pretty much anywhere on the planet that isn't completely bone dry or extremely frozen solid, and it would produce stable calories in a way that's compatible with livestock as well, which I see as a huge plus. Anywhere that you graze, cows or goats or sheep, you should be able to plant bunya nuts as well without too much difficulty.
Yeah, they don't tend to mess with them too much, do they? Cattle
Mm,
don't tend to get too amongst them with their spikes and prickles.
mm.
Um, Firstly, you're just awesome. That is such a cool thing that you're doing. It's just amazing and so inspiring. So I wanted to ask you though. So have you've got with your angustifolias, the Paranal pine, do
Mm.
you have them fruiting at this stage? Or
It's early days. I think my biggest ones are probably about a meter tall. So I'm looking at another 10 to 20 years.
okay, yeah,
We'll see how
cool,
we go. So I'm
cool.
hoping I live long enough to get like at least a couple of years of hybrids out. And the plan is to send that seed to every reliable grower on the planet that I can find, because I think this is a bigger story than Australia.
Yeah, awesome. So I've got a few seedlings as well that I've tracked down from various spots. One that a friend of mine brought back from Brazil as well.
Hmm.
Brought a sneaky little seed back that happened to fall into her backpack, and she got it raised up. So I've got them planted on a few sites. I did have the great fortune to be over in southern Brazil at the tail end of the pinon season. They call it pinon.
Oh, you've seen them in habitat, or at least growing in their homeland.
Yeah, and I've eaten a good chunk of them over there too, actually. Yeah,
Mm.
so they're remarkable, and yeah, I'm getting a bit of tingles from just how homely it was to have them over there, to be so far away from home,
Mm.
but in such a familiar landscape.
Mm.
Feeling so homely there amongst those araucarias, and it was amazing to be there at the tail end of that season and to eat some and to engage with them a lot. But it's extraordinary how that far away. I mean, so much of that east coast of southern Brazil, so much of what they call the Mata Atlantic forest, is so similar to our East
Mm.
Coast
Mm.
rainforest here. All the
Yeah.
myrtaceous plants.
Everything from Uruguay loves growing in my garden.
Yeah, yeah, totally, totally. But yeah, seeing them over there was incredible, and that sense that, for me, the sense of growing them together, I hadn't actually thought of what you'd thought of, actually giving them a chance to cross pollinate. That's epic.
Mm.
But just the fact that they have different harvest seasons is extraordinary. They grow in a similar climate, but have different harvest seasons is awesome. So the bunyas
Mm.
are usually coming on January, February, late
Mm.
December at the very earliest, whereas the pinon, so the bunya has that cycle where it flowers, August, September, and then it has the full 16 months or something until that flower turns into a fruit.
Mm.
Yeah. So it's got that long cycle. The pinon, I think, is just an annual cycle. So it flowers a similar time, but then it's fruiting like May, June.
Mm.
So it has that shorter cycle of fruiting. But obviously, to grow the two crops side by side, it means that potentially from January with a bit of storage, even without drying and all that sort of processing, from January through till I was eating them over there in August, like there were still
Ah,
fresh ones
yes.
around. So you have
Oh,
this epic long season of
yeah.
that starch. Yeah.
Yeah, yep, yep, yep. I could see the potential. Do you think there's potential to reach out to southern Brazil, to people working with the Paranapine to contribute to this project, to access diverse banyas to grow over there?
I could do my best to connect with a few people because I know a few people in southern Brazil that are way into agroforestry and well connected.
Yeah, because
And
if I'm
that's
going out and collecting this unusual diverse material that's just rat food otherwise, I would go out of my way to send it to a place where it could be grown out and appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, and if we can get that material to a quarantine station, like I believe Tropical Fruit World up the road has a proper quarantine station
Yeah,
that you
yeah.
can actually bring stuff to. So if we could actually bring in a vast quantity and go through that process, it'd be well worth it.
Brilliant, brilliant. Oh, there you
Yeah.
go. There you go. We will do that.
Okay, cool.
But
Well, I'll do my best to follow up those connections. I've got a few connections over there. I'll follow that up with.
excellent. I wanted to ask too as well. Do you see any development in up to this point or potential in the future for more tree crops to be further improved in your part of the world, in like the northern New South Wales kind of subtropical hub?
Well, look, I mean, absolutely. But it's interesting. I guess where I'm at, I guess maybe where my focus and energy is at is this sense of the main thing we need to improve is our attitude as a community to actually want to have a genuine relationship with these things and have a really
Mm.
intimate relationship with our food and landscape. And I guess whilst the improving genetics and selection is a huge and important part of that, I guess what my focus has been and I guess probably still feels like that's mostly where my focus is more engaging culturally to get people to relate more, to encourage and support people that want to tune into seasonal regenerative eating that from plants that have, you know, great life force and have, robust character and adaptability to changing conditions and so on. Um, what I think the greatest opportunity or the lowest hanging fruit is just engaging with what we've already got. And the more people are out there doing that and taking their cuttings and moving it to new places, collecting their seed, planting them, the more we're just doing that as a community. So I think it's great that individuals do that. And I just love the dudes out there doing that, that are all the individuals out there just intensely focused on doing that work of breeding and trialing and roguing and developing and finding those great little characteristics and running with them. But I think the more we just do it as a community and get it out there, the more nature's going to run with that process for us and support us to do that.
Yeah,
So,
you're right. There's this the great man theory of history that like when you write
yeah,
history books, it's really easy to just here's a chapter on Napoleon Bonaparte and he did all these things, and
yeah,
just kind of gloss over thousands of other people in the French military and parliament and economy and everything that were actually doing the work, and you just boil it down to like this superstar. And I think you can fall into the same trap with plant breeding, thinking, oh, you could just have a Luther Burbank and they solve all your problems. But you actually need a community that's going to continue that tradition for, thousands of years potentially to actually take it somewhere meaningful rather than, just this one person who stands out.
yeah. That's where it's at for me. I guess again, they're happening on both those levels.
Mm.
But I guess that's where I'm investing my energy is that being just an engaging part of the community, just getting the genetics out there as much as we can, uh, encouraging and empowering those who are open and interested to experiment and explore and to engage more intimately with their food growing.
We're,
And
we're
those
gonna
things are going to happen.
we're gonna have to get back to talking more about community building, but we should spend some time talking about management for reducing inputs.
Yeah.
And I would really love to hear, like, I'll just throw the whole question open and get your perspective on how we can learn to grow plants and produce food without having to put huge amounts of irrigation and fertility and pest management and weeding into the process.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I guess in the long run, particularly when I think about water, like irrigation,
Mm,
um, I guess there's a few factors there. I mean, one is that like when I've traveled in and sometimes worked in places where there's not such an intensive focus on controlling agricultural inputs and irrigation. It's like, okay, you grow stuff in the wet season, in the dry season, you eat stored stuff, and you tend to get really good at eating all the other foods because a big part of like the control of irrigation and big inputs is actually just supporting people to eat a smaller range of food that they feel comfortable with.
mm,
And it actually discourages engaging with broader and diverse parts of the landscape. It's like as you go through. So, for instance, in southern Laos, where I spent a couple of months, like just working on a project there and moving through a lot of different villages and landscapes there, um, it seemed like their approach was definitely going there in the dry season. You hardly see a thing growing anywhere. Like
mm.
there's a few small gardens. They'd use the big old bomb shells, the cluster bombs, because there's been such a horrifically bombed place, horrifically through the Vietnam War. But they use all these big bomb shells and they've drilled holes underneath them and they use them as raised gardens to stop pigs and chickens eating the small amount of intentional crops that they grow, which might be like shallots and a few herbs. It's just a tiny amount of stuff growing.
Mm.
But in the dry season, when everything is just like dry rice stubble and like nothing around, they're all eating all these leaves of trees, like they've got no shortage of fresh, beautiful greens. And it's just all stuff that doesn't need the irrigation. It's got access to that water table below. So ultimately, bringing more, obviously, perennial, enduring crops into our systems is number one,
Mm.
so that the most resilient plants will continue to survive whether they've got irrigation or not once they're established. Obviously, secondly, a part of that is nurturing a healthy ecosystem so that we've got the best possible chance to keep on raising more and more of those resilient crops that can continue to feed us. But I so in terms of irrigation, it's having the diversity of resilient stuff there that does keep food trickling when you don't have it. But having said that, rain just seems to be less and less predictable, seemingly around the world, and there are certain crops that do need that. I've just totally lost track of the question. I'm so sorry. Can you come back
No,
to the
no, no.
question?
Just in general, like, what are your strategies and where do you see the opportunities for producing systems that need less inputs to function?
Yeah, right. Yeah, sure. So
Mm,
the strategies is again diversity. Diversity is number one, um, and growing for me in the environment I live in, growing multi-strata, dense, diverse plantings really, and being prepared. Part of it too is being prepared. Like this time of year, we've had a few wet springs lately, but this time of year, we can usually expect between being at the tail end of the winter time where things grow slower, being usually a pretty windy time where westerlies kick in, and generally being lower rainfall, we can usually expect this time of year is usually going to be water's more likely a constraint. Um, then we kind of accept that's the cycle and work with that and make sure we grow really well in the periods where we do have the rain.
mm.
Um, hey, I just apologize again. I don't know where I've just gone lofty to. So coming back, I had a total train of thought there when I started to talk about this drier time of year, and I've just totally lost where I was going. I'm really sorry.
Well,
Um,
that makes me think about staple crops. So grain crops can be
mm,
trickier because you need water at the time that you want them to start growing, but
yeah,
then you usually need relatively dry weather at the time when you'd want to harvest and store them. And if either of those ingredients turn up at the wrong time, you can get nothing. Like you can do all of that work putting a crop in and get pretty much nothing. And I'm wondering,
yeah.
like, have you seen uh, any opportunities for grains to work in really variable rainfall, or do you think uh, hardy tuber and tree crops are going to come to the fore?
Well, yeah. Look, I'm definitely of the latter, and I know you've done lots of work in that realm as well, but I think, yeah, really, I mean, I come down to, I guess, by being probably quite ambitious and very full and having lots of things going on, I just keep on choosing what's easy.
Mm.
And it's just never easy to forage around for a bunch of buckwheat and chia seed and amaranth seed. And like it's valuable to have a little bit of it. But really, in systems that I'm talking about systems where I want intimate engagement with, I'm not talking obviously large scale, huge commercial industrial farms, but in the kind of intimate relationship I want with an ecosystem, and I think is important that most of us have in our region, it's tree crops and tubers. It's just what it is.
Mm.
I think it's great that grains are going on, and I think it's great that there's dryland rice growers and further west that people are growing millet and all this sort of stuff. I think it's great that that's all in the mix, but I don't think that's where our resilience lies. Yeah,
I,
in growing that stuff and then trying to store it long enough to fight off the mold and the rats and everything else that wants to have a go at that. I think, tubers in the ground have their problem as well. I mean, rats are a huge issue with tubers. Scrub turkeys can be a huge issue with tubers.
mm.
There's problems with them, of course, but between them, in my climate, between them and green banana starch and tree crops, it's like there's always plenty there.
My
Yeah.
vision of the future is that the village basically looks up in the Bunya groves and it's like, oh, there's
Mm.
plenty of cones on them this year. We don't have to do all of the work of planting a corn crop because
Yeah.
we know we've got the starch coming from a better source. And it's only when you have a dud year where the pollination failed on the bunyas that you're like, okay, get out the hose, put everything off the calendar. We have to dig up all of this space to grow a big corn crop.
Well, yeah, I really love that too, because I think that again, like kind of like breaking down the barriers and the fixation between societies or people being, hunter and gatherers or being agriculturalists. I think that being responsive to the needs of of the situation from moment to moment and having all the skills to be able to do it, having all the genetic materials and all the skills to be able to respond intelligently is exactly where the resilience lies. So
Mm,
like you say, like why enslave ourselves all the time if we don't need to? If we've got a sense of natural abundance, but then being able to, like you say, predict those times where there's shortage and be able to use our skills and our technology and our ability to control environments intensively through agricultural techniques, then use them as much as we can. And we've got to keep them alive. But yeah, like I definitely feel like integrating more of the wild harvest into our flow is super important for cultural evolution, that we don't get caught in that intensive agricultural trap of just being caught in a calendar of just doing the same thing over and over, sort of whether you need to or not,
mm,
and ignoring other opportunities. And I think when we look to any cultures that have had long periods of time to engage with their landscape and learn how those cultures move between different resources at different times and may predict or rely upon them to some degree, but have always got backup plans and are always responsive to changes, is sort of what we've got to re-embrace. And
mm.
there's so many challenges with that. Again, like economically, if people have a like a role, like, hey, I'm a grower or I'm a farmer or I'm a grazier, you get caught in certain patterns and routines and ways of doing things. I find that I can get so caught in that sort of a remembrance of an annual cycle. I sort of start to go, okay, well, citrus are flowering. I've got that smell in my mind. That's sort of reminding me of all the things I sort of should be doing now. I should be digging up the last of the ginger and turmeric because it's going to start to pop soon if I want to store some and
Mm.
sell some. Now's the time. I should be starting to plant this. And you get these little triggers that encourage growers to grow and do their things. But I like that bunya trigger because it's really important, the triggers, to be just like, hey, just bloody walk away from this and just let the system be for a while, and don't be hyper controlling or be super important on yourself as a key part of that system. And remembering to take those triggers to step away is really valuable.
Mm.
Um, when the mull are running, when the bunyas are fruiting, whatever. And I think that's really, really important to keep engaging with as well, to move between those different roles we can take in that
Mm.
ecosystem. Yeah.
I think the quote is specialization is for insects.
Yeah, yeah, nice. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Now, using, I think you're moving towards more syntropic management systems. Have you found any benefits with nutrient and fertility management with that kind of approach?
Well, look, I would say, look, I guess for me, engaging with, I had the fortune to, however long ago that was, 8 or 9 years ago or something, we had a couple of syntropic teachers come over from Brazil, Namaste and Patricia Vaz. So, yeah, a couple of amazing agroforesters. When they shared their food forests in a lot of ways, and I'd been back from since I was like 19 or 20, I got exposed via an amazing lecturer who to me was a real kind of, you know, elder at the time, really, who'd spent a lot of time with Papua New Guinean successional food farmers in the 70s and 80s. Um, and I came to really value an understanding of forest succession and the importance of that being the foundation of how I go about food growing and regenerating land and working within a system that really cycles well, that does have really effective nutrient cycles, and carbon cycles and all that sort of thing. So having a foundation in that and playing around lots with different food forests in different climates, I guess we're always like kind of trying to learn relationships between things. When you bring all these different organisms from all around the world, and then you try and find out where they work best. How much shade do they like in this environment? And is it the same as the amount of shade they like in the tropics? And all this sort of thing. When we start to recombine all these different organisms from different places, there's such an immense amount of learning that happens. And one of the great things I got out of this syntropic training was a fairly kind of streamlined and simplified strategic way to go about stacking in time and space. I guess that's the kind of core of what I got. And in doing stuff in a more linear fashion than I had been doing more work on contour and much more organic kind of smaller scale forms. In doing things in a more linear fashion with a more simplified repetitive pattern, it enabled scaling up production for me.
Mm.
So that was something I got out of this syntropic approach, I guess, was just some approaches to organizing the landscape in a way that suddenly envisaged me to think and act on a larger scale than I had been in my sort of complex, diverse food forestry before then. So I'm really grateful for those tools. So that's really what I brought from the syntropic approach is some really great organizational tools to that multi-strata successional approach. And I think for me, if I live in an environment, I look at the blueprint of how that environment expresses itself best. And in the environment you and I live in, if we're on a reasonably fertile soil and we're not in a swamp that's like anaerobic or whatever,
Mm.
you know, a dense multi-strata forest is how this ecosystem expresses itself at its fullest and richest. And within large tracts of that forest, periodic clearings and fires, natural or otherwise, and periodic landslides and floods, you know, create all these disturbances within that forest system that enables it to regenerate and enables earlier successional plants to thrive once again and create greater diversity and complexity through those disturbances. So for me, the model of a multi-strata, megadiverse system that has a whole mosaic of disturbances within it, like that's what nature does here, and that's what, for me, I feel like if I want to earn my place as a valued member of this ecosystem, I need to accept that. I need to work out how I act as an agent within that.
Mm.
And so I guess what I've come to is that if that's the way, when we had these huge rainfall events like we've had so many of in the last 5 or 6 years, you know,
Mm.
the amount of leaching that goes on in a soil that doesn't have rich, thick carbon and mats of, you know, multi-species fungal interconnection and a mega diverse soil flora and fauna and fungal. If you don't have that in your soil, it's just a it's just a leaking sink,
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
those big rainfall events of boron and calcium and whatever else, like so much gets lost from that soil. And then we get caught up in needing to have, you know, industrial scale inputs to put back in there, whether it's crushed up limestone from some quarry a few hundred k's away, or whether it's, you know, concentrated chook shit that's been fed on an intensive grain farm to be able to get that chook shit to us. We get in so many ways, unless we're actually living within that ecological system. We're just so dependent on all those industrial inputs and all the transport involved. And so really what it comes down to is in these high rainfall climates, lots of woody material breaking down to humus and
Mm.
feeding fungi is the foundation to me of a healthy ecosystem, and a system that's going to have the greatest nutritional value, and the greatest resilience in dry periods, in wet periods. So once we get that epic humus-rich soil, which in this climate you can only get that through woody material. Like you can add as much straw as you want, like it just gets eaten up every wet
Yeah,
season.
it evaporates in months.
It leaves nothing behind. You've got to have chunks of wood constantly breaking down.
I actually
So
have a theory that if you add that rapidly decomposing carbon, the soil can actually end up in worse condition after it's gone. Like it seems to accelerate burning off the more stable carbon.
okay, yes, so interesting. Very interesting. Because yeah, it's certainly, as you pointed out, it's certainly not leaving anything behind, and maybe it's even taking away. It's fast. I mean, I hats off to the tenacity of growers that just can keep on, just in this climate, just keep on bringing vast amounts of inputs, putting them back on the soil, churning out crops and doing it again and again. Like that's an incredible strength of resilience and dedication. And in many ways, I'm not that strong a person to be able to do that. I actually don't have the fortitude
It's
or the humility to do
it's the
that.
classic no dig like 6 inch of mulch brought in machine processed mulch garden. It's like yeah,
Yeah,
you're not digging, but you're lifting how many
yeah,
tons of that
tons and
imported
tons of
biomass?
stuff.
Yeah.
So the approach I've taken is like, when I'm in situations where I have access to those materials, I'm like, great, let's use them to start a system. Like, how awesome is it to have like on some of my sites, I can get quite regularly loads of wood chips, dumped often for free,
Mm.
because it's a convenient spot to dump, and you get that network, and it's like, wow, why wouldn't I use that? I've got a tractor to spread it. Like, why wouldn't I start some new beds with that? Like use a deep ripper and open up the soil and plow the first load in, make a big disturbance, bring in some chook shit. There's large scale chickens I can collect shit from. I can collect cow shit. Um, Bring in some carbon like that wood chip, or even straw. Sometimes I have started a garden with. Whatever it takes to get a big area going quickly is
Mm.
great for me. But then create a system that's no longer dependent on that.
Yeah, yeah. It's using it catalytically.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm all for that. But the whole notion of doing it over and over again, some people can seem to do it over and over. I can't. I find infuriating, and I don't find like my my back strong enough, or my will is strong enough to keep doing it. Like
Mm.
I really want to let nature take over the system, and I want to be dancing within that. So yeah, getting all those. So a great thing that's done in syntropics when it's done well is lots of fast emergent tall woody biomass that within a few years you can start to feed back into that system and start to build up that sponge. Because
Mm.
I definitely saw in the droughts before our recent wet period, at that stage, living down on a little, intermittent salt estuarine area at that stage, which was obviously still an intact wetland in its own way. Like at the time, there wasn't much flow, and it had a sandbar over it, and so there was water saturating in the landscape, sitting there, and when all around me, trees, grass, everything, just dead material was just turned to powder and blowing in the wind all around. There I was sitting in this sink where all the ground level stuff was dead. Ferns had died, everything had died. But there's just trees still just pumping this water out of the ground. And when I dig through that humus, they're waterlogged below, so they're part of a healthy landscape that's got water in it. but then all that humus above it is just aerated and spongy, and moisture was like wicking up through it. And it has the most beautiful, combination of both air and moisture within it. And
Mm.
until we get that sponge back, which is kind of like, it's almost geological time to really get that back where it's been completely mined and stripped. But the more we can just slowly build that sponge back into the landscape that's been so decimated, that's our key to resilience. Is getting that humus sponge back in the landscape. And I don't see, from my own experience and talking to lots of people doing this, I don't see any way to do that other than rotten wood back into the soil in the landscape I live in.
Mm. Mm.
So the more I can just keep driving that, and my learning in this process is the importance of when and how to prune to make sure all those dense early successional plants, which are really designed to drive, sugars and carbon and water back into the cycle, to make sure that they're not holding back the next generation too much. So how to manage those pioneers is sort of a key learning for me. And for people that are doing, a syntropic approach, and there are people out there that are sort of really hardline trying to do it with minimal inputs to start with, and they're often using the tropical grasses really intensively within that. To begin with, it's managing intensively with grasses, and like that's really engaging and demanding. It's like you don't want to miss the time to cut. You can't let these grasses dominate your system, but you want to use them to drive your system.
Mm.
And then once the grasses once bananas and woody plants start to kick in, they become the key drivers of that system, and managing and pruning them and cycling their biomass efficiently, effectively back in the soil is, it's amazing to see. At times it's amazing to see how rapidly it's rebuilding the soil, and other times, like the dry periods we've just been through, I just sort of go, wow, where'd all that material go? But I know that there's nothing more I can be doing than that, really,
Mm.
is cycling that material as much as I can into the system, and trying to get it as tight as I can to the soil. At times trying to bundle it together as much as I can so that it sort of can create those conditions that continue to harbor healthy soil organisms and healthy life forces.
Mm.
So
Do
yeah,
you,
so
mm.
yeah.
Well, I was wondering, do you think syntropic agriculture, syntropic approaches had a communication problem in the beginning, not least because it was originally written in Portuguese, but the the management system has a degree of nuance and complexity to it, which I think is gradual. You mentioned that you kind of grasped onto it when you were given a more streamlined version of it. And I wonder if that's a process that all of these methods go through. Like the very early permaculture, I think, had similar issues. It was, I mean, you've read that book. It's huge, it's very complex, it's got so many ideas in it
Yeah.
and then it kind of transformed into like mulch and newspaper backyard vegetable gardening and like threw out like 90% of the original ideas to come up with a simpler model that's easier to transmit to the next person. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that problem of like complexity and puritanism of the original theory versus the inevitable kind of democratization of the method as it spreads?
I've got I've got lots of thoughts, and probably people that spend a bit of time around me might get overhearing my thoughts at times about some of these things. But like I guess in short, yeah, like I think my first connection to some of the work of Ernest Gosch pre doing the training that I did here in Australia 8 or 9 years ago, whenever that was, somewhere in that time period, was a few videos that were getting out there that were they were actually really badly dubbed in a way that was sort of funny, like when
Mm.
they're translated and captioned in a way that was almost like, wow, that was like you couldn't have made that any funnier if you tried. Like there was a few videos that I got shown. People were like, check out what this guy's doing. It's really interesting, this stuff. And so I couldn't engage particularly with anything unique going on because it was quite poorly translated. It was hard to get the core of the message that was being shared or
Mm.
what was going on. And if I want to put in short the way I see the way the syntropic industry, if you will, certainly in this region's developing, and the little bits I've touched base with it in other parts of the world at the moment, it's like, so when the permaculture sort of story was beginning to flourish with some of those publications in the in the 80s, and or even from the late 70s, or some of those earlier publications, the way communication was disseminated at that time was like a very slow and steady and intimate kind of a way for
Mm.
something to very slowly grow and disperse. And what I've learned about the recent syntropic bubble is like, with the power of the internet now and the tools of sharing and the ways that people can represent what to others, to convince other people of what they think that they can do, and use other people's imagery and use other people's media and attach themselves to it and say, I do this. The amount of stuff that's getting out there that's syntropic is coming from people that look, the majority of them have the best of intentions and want to do all these positive, amazing things in the world, but don't have the foundational skills of basic plant management and growing, and even just the ability to be able to manage a large system over a long period of time to be able to actually implement this stuff effectively. So there's a lot of really poor stuff going on, in my opinion, in the name of syntropics, and sure, there's a bunch of eucalypts and bananas getting planted around that people can chop down as biomass, and that's good if that can be managed well. But there's really not many people that have the experience, with a lot of different diverse plant material to create a really effective succession over time that's going to really give good returns for the effort that's put in. And look, in the Australian economy, if you want to start valuing labor, it's a you know extremely challenging thing to take
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Like, you've
Yeah.
got to accept a lot of knocks on the learning process. But I guess what I'm saying is there's a few really sexy videos that came out around the time that some of these trainings started to happen outside of Brazil, um, that are beautiful depictions of possibilities of the future, and some beautiful depictions of some of the amazing stuff that Ernest Gosch has done in Brazil. Um, but ultimately, tell fairy tale stories of best case scenarios. And
Mm.
they are amazing sales tools. And anyone that wants to attach themselves to that and say, I do this, it's a really easy way to sell a product to someone, sell a system to someone. So that there's a lot of money in quite a few places of the world these days, putting in syntropic systems for people that for the best of their intentions believe they're investing in a really regenerative, awesome future, and they're doing something really positive just by putting some stuff in the ground. But a lot of them are ending up with systems that are absolute nightmare to manage, and
Hmm.
and they're often being implemented by people that aren't still there to maintain them, and maybe don't even have the experience to maintain them because they haven't been through the whole system themselves. And a lot of those systems get left, and between 6 months or 2 years later, a lot of people are just going, "Good God, what have we done? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
where's all this food coming from? And like, how am I going to manage this?" And
It reminds me of a little anecdote that I've heard from like the late 70s, early 80s. Permaculture tried to introduce a whole lot of like new perennial crops that are like, resilient and sustainable, but nobody knew how to use them or manage them. And a lot of the gardens quickly ended up overflowing with these horrible perennial plants that nobody even knew how to get rid of.
yeah,
And it kind of tainted the whole movement for quite some time. This happened in our own village. There was a legend of a permaculture garden that just went completely feral, and
yeah,
like it became like a swear word to mention permaculture for I think like 15, 20 years before people
yeah.
forgot.
Yeah, well, Syntropics is on its way there in some places as well, I'm sure. So, but yeah, look, absolutely. And look, what you point out is really important. It's like the culture of how to manage that food and then process it and eat it and be committed to that is
Mm,
a key part of that system. That
yeah.
that the harvest is the maintenance, and a lot of people are putting in systems just like, oh, you just chop and drop it, and like, and because people are most of the people where around where I live are between their time management and the amount of money they have access to and the cheapness of other food around, just often end up buying other food anyway and
Yeah,
not actually
yeah.
engaging enough with the system that they have. They need to be often very committed and very resourceful and very focused on that goal to be doing that. It's really easy to put some rice or pasta in some hot water and have a starch, then sort of dig up something and peel it and then realize that actually, wow, this is not the best time of year to do that. It might be better to wait another 3 or 4 months before those starches thicken, or
Yeah.
the incredible nuance and complexity of that system. Most people don't have the skills and don't actually have the evolutionary pressure to learn those skills right now.
It,
In
it,
the,
it
in the
it's like the old saying, give a man a fish or teach a man to fish. But what if the man doesn't even know how to like cook or eat the fish? Like
yeah,
they've never tasted it before. So you'd be
yeah.
wasting your time doing either of those things until you've actually taught them how to cook a fish and
Absolutely.
prove
And and
it.
and look, these amazing plants that we've evolved, they have co-evolved with humans for so long that they require our engagement
Yeah.
to remain healthy and strong. And if they don't, like you say, the consequences are huge for both them and the environment. Sometimes it's not good for that plant. Other times it's not good for the environment because it takes over.
Mm.
Like, bamboo is a classic one. Like the amount of people that have learned, okay, running bamboo is not something you plant because of the early house plants that all got dumped around and started to take over, or the aurea bamboo and stuff. But then there's clumping bamboos, and then the amount of people that I see. I mean, most people put in gardens in the kind of lifestyle that I see all around me and live in. Most people want as low a maintenance garden as possible, even if they like gardening,
Hmm.
even if they really like eating food from their garden, even if they really like gardening, because of the pressures of time and money of the world that we live in, they often don't do a lot of it. And so the larger an area that someone takes on, the more likely is it's going to get completely overrun and become a burden rather than a resource. Uh,
Particularly in our climate.
Particularly in our climate, it can happen very quickly. It can happen when you turn your back.
Hmm.
You can
Hmm.
turn your back for a summer and it's happened. Like so. So bamboo is a classic example. I really enjoy eating bamboo shoots. I really like building and constructing with bamboo, and there's vast amounts of clumping bamboos now in our region. Since the 70s, people have been bringing in all these bamboos. We've had all these collectors, and what I really like to is talking to the old collectors and and getting the refinement of like, hey, of all the hundreds of ones you've grown, like which are the really good ones? Which are the ones that are easy to manage? Which are the ones that give you good returns? And so
Hmm.
like it's great to talk to the old growers that are no longer still the big collectors, but have worked out just what the really good ones are. The
Hmm.
refinement of that is really valuable. So I've sort of come down to there's a few different species that I like to work with that work well with some of my systems, but like the amount of people that plant bamboo, and you've probably got a 5 year period where you can get away with not doing too much on bamboo, and then after that you really need to at least once a year have a big cull in there. And
Hmm.
if you're not doing that, it's because you're cutting so many shoots regularly that you don't have to do that. So you've either got to be continually harvesting shoots, and each time you harvest a shoot, you're choosing which one to take, and most importantly, you're choosing which one to leave as to how you want that clump to shape itself. Just like when you manage a banana, you
Yeah.
choose which suckers you want to take by which ones you want to leave. Which way do I want this banana walking? Which is the strongest looking sucker? So when we harvest bamboo shoots, according to how we want that clump to be, so that everywhere I can reach in, I can reach my arm in, I can reach a saw in, it's comfortable and easy, and I've got space and I've got room, and there's not dead material breeding rats and all that sort of stuff. It can be quite simple a way of managing that. But if that is not done, those plants just get more and more of a nightmare every year, to a point where most people just get to a point of just like getting an excavator and ripping them out and burning them in a bonfire somewhere,
Yeah. Yeah.
like because they actually haven't engaged with the plant the way the plant needs engagement. And that plant's evolved with humans to be engaged as that. We've co-evolved with that process to be that agent that engages and shapes them.
Do you think subtropical Australia has a uniquely challenging issue of culture because the plants that we can grow readily here are so different from our dominant Anglo culture that we kind of brought with
Absolutely.
us?
Oh, absolutely. Again, this is my one of my constant rants that I'm always at, and I yeah, like it is such an obstacle. And wow, like I have to say there's times where I just get overwhelmingly depressed by that fact, to be honest, because as a grower that has so many different projects, that my main focus is local food culture,
Mm.
people engaging with the seasons, the time, the place. And I believe that's our greatest healing. That's the greatest gift we can give to our ecosystems. The greatest role we can take is being a custodian that learns that stuff, that understands that stuff, that practices it. And I can do X amount of that myself, but without a whole community that does that, I'm just like, I'm left like, you know, powerless to do much. And without consumers that also think and want to support that way, be it families buying veggie boxes, be it chefs supporting local seasonal food as their priority, as their prime focus. Without all that, we can't do any of this, you know, like we can, and also in our climate, because we've got a huge diversity of plants, we can get caught up with growers having way more things than we can possibly process ourselves.
Hmm.
You know, we can have so many different crops that you just like, holy shit, like which tropical starch am I going to eat today? You know, and do I have time and energy?
What's the technique? Like I only
And what's
did
the
it like
technique?
3 years ago and I can't remember.
Yeah,
I've only
yeah,
done it once.
you can have so much going that keeping that culture alive is the important thing, and you need whole communities to do that. So,
Yeah.
so for me, a big part of my world has been partly as a grower engaging with consumers with that story, and that's a big job, and I get tired of that sometimes, having to explain to people what's seasonal and what's not. And I take my hats off to all those people that go to their farmers markets every week, you know, like the growers are there every week telling that story to everyone, trying to let people know this is what's seasonal, and hey, please don't expect that, because, you know, that might have been on television, that might have been exciting because that chef talked about it, but they were based in Melbourne or California
Hmm.
or whatever, you know, and it's just not appropriate. So there's people on constantly having to have that discussion, because the majority of human populations are getting their information from media, not from their immediate environment, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so you have to sort of take this role as a translator to support that process. But for me, one of the big things that I try and do with that, I've run lots of trainings over the years in, you know, permaculture, agroforestry, agroecology, and that's always actually the biggest and most important thing is the cooking and the sharing of food,
Yeah.
and the encouraging and empowering for people just to engage and try and get in there. And again, describing all that nuance of like, okay, yes, you might have tried that taro thing that was badly cooked, and now you've got a bad taste in your mouth because it had that prickly thing in the back of your throat. But like there is so much complexity, because that is one of thousands of varieties of taro, and that wasn't cooked properly.
Yeah.
And it may have even been an old taro, you know, that wasn't even the right
Grown
stage to
properly. Yeah.
harvest. And you know, all this complexity that you have to try and teach as foundational knowledge to encourage and support people to step away from what is ultimately a Eurocentric, industrial, agricultural, you know, kind of just we're just marinated in, you know,
Mm.
generation after generation, more so, you know, in the mainstream. So
Has your local culture had any notable wins on that front of like a new food or ingredient that grows well in the area that people have generally accepted or become aware of?
it's a good question. Like it happens slowly. Like for instance, like I was market gardening in Brisbane at Northern Street City Farm in the early 2000s. And like that was like at that time, like kale was a frontier plant, you know, like people starting to get to know
It's so
kale
funny
over
looking
kale.
back. But I mean,
Yeah.
people need to understand, like in the 60s, broccoli was like
Yeah.
exotic in Australia. No one had ever
Yeah.
heard of it before. And then the Greeks and the Italians brought it in, and people were like, what's this crazy thing that we've never seen? Is it edible? And it took probably another 10 or 20 years for it to become ordinary.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Look, so it's a slow and constantly moving frontier. So it is good to look back to see we've actually come a long way. You
Mm.
know, like I think I imagine, look, I have to say, I imagine that like if we looked at Australia maybe pre-World War II or something, it quite possibly could have had mainstream Australia quite possibly might have had the most simplistic food culture almost imaginable.
Yeah.
Um, Coming originally from primarily English colonized roots, and England have a pretty limited palate, and you know, and
Weston
limited.
Price, the anthropologist and health kind of researcher,
Yep.
when he toured the world, he said Anglo people in Australia were the most malnourished that he's seen anywhere on the
I wouldn't.
planet.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I
Mm,
don't doubt that at all. Yeah, okay. So there it is. That's been researched. So yeah, there it is. Lack of diversity, and but so it's good to see how much, particularly other cultures have brought in.
mm,
Other cultural influences have been bringing in and slowly broadening that palette. And as people have travelled, as people have left Australia more and travelled more as well, and as we've also looked more towards our indigenous foods, for the small portion of the population that are doing that, we've suddenly got all this stuff open, and it's so exciting, the incredible and particular region that you and I live in. Like, wow, the extraordinary amount of crops we can grow that
mm.
are indigenous bush food crops that are from all these different other ecosystems of the world, and we've got quite a lot of them here. It's incredible. So, but yeah, the actual uptake in the mainstream is really, really slow, and can be really frustrating. I would say, look, I would say that again, this is by no means big scale mainstream, but I could say that in the last 20 years, from probably like one bun long taro plant that I probably got 20 years ago. Wow, I don't know how many taros I've grown and propagated, but what we can say is that probably almost everything from that original plant has been eaten, or propagated from, and a lot of the tops have been planted. And, thousands and thousands and thousands of taro plants have gone
Mm.
into various regions, and then various new hubs that someone takes it to somewhere in Grafton, and someone takes it, the way these plants and taro, a lot of people have really taken to taro locally. Like,
Mm.
it's again, it's really challenging to grow and sell some of these crops and compete with industrial organic potatoes, for price per kilo, you
Hmm.
know, for the amount of time and space that they hold compared to, a potato crop that's machine harvested in, 3 to 4 months, really huge amount per unit area, a really simple, low maintenance system. Um, Taro is super easy to grow, but it takes time in the ground. It holds space in the ground, and it's really hard when you've got a system that's based on more manual inputs and human
Hmm.
inputs rather than large scale mechanization to be able to make things super affordable. So,
One thing,
so
one thing I've thought about is I keep coming back to this vision of the Catholic communion wafer as like it's not competing with Doritos or kilograms of industrial potatoes as a source of starch. It's a source of like meaning, of
mm,
significance.
mm.
And I really wonder if there's an opportunity to have something like communion, but it's a tiny little portion of a locally grown, well-cooked taro that everyone
Mm.
gets a little bit. And you think about the significance of that in the community rather than, trying to compete with, industrial food on a per kilo or per sensation basis.
Yeah, I love that, and I guess as a metaphor of that, I mean, one of the things that myself and a lot of the community that I kind of grow and live and work within, we just love to have local feasts, like, and
Hmm.
engage as many people as we can within them. So, it's just so much fun when you can cook for, like, 5, 20, 200 people from just whatever you harvest in that moment in the garden, and almost any given moment in our food forests, we can cook for that many people with whatever's there. And whether the base of it is green papaya or cassava that's at that time of year, or whether it's like taro and green bananas and what the seasonal herbs are there, but just having events and the focus on really genuinely, and not just, hey, here's some local food, but it's still mostly Eurocentric stuff that we're all familiar with, but really different stuff, cooking it really well, preferably from people that have a cultural background or have shared their cultural background of how that's done well. Because it's the whole idea of substitution, what a lot of people do. It's like, oh, it's kind of like a potato, that story. It's like, well, no, it's a completely unique thing that has really different qualities, as a potato has really unique different qualities, you know.
Mm.
So really, those things are kind of like that communion for me when we get together and actually just go, this meal is, you know, other than, you know, some salt and maybe a couple of tins of coconut cream. I'm going to get those coconuts going though. You know, they're coming. They're coming. But at the
Yeah.
moment, one of my important ingredients for a lot of my feasts is still coconut cream. But I plant a lot in the ground and they're on their way.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
but you know, yeah, those sorts of the more we can have that, the more it does slowly integrate this into people's culture. And
Yeah.
and I just love it. So the more and more people that take to, if there's one particular food they take to, and they like one particular dish they like. Um, One of my beautiful friends from the Solomon Islands, Marley, makes this incredible dish. They call asabatia. It's green banana in the Solomons, and it's just grated near ripe bananas, preferably like green bananas that are almost ripe, starting to soften and sweeten a little bit, grated up, wrapped in these little dumplings with either the leaf of a cucurbit or like the one we did recently. We used the young leaves of the mulberry
Mm-hmm.
to wrap them up, packed into little parcels, cooked in over a fire in a saucepan with coconut cream and salt. And it's like, wow, it is just anyone I know who has ever tried that dish is just like, what? You know, like it's the most incredible starch. And it's with all those oils and fats from the coconut slow cooked in it. It's just extraordinary. And like green banana, like green bananas are just there all the time. Like we have that starch readily available all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so like just engaging with cultures that really know how to work with these things is so important, and exposing people to them, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's a slow process because, you know, I think we're all creatures of habit. And I have to say, I feel like a lot of the change that I've made in my life has been because for whatever reasons, I think a lot of farmers that have moved into regenerative farming often say that a lot of their really big changes have come from crises. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like for me, various different health crises, various awarenesses of ecological crises happening, you know, that I've had I guess, the good fortune to be exposed to and marinated in enough through my experiences to go, wow, we need to do something about this. But as long as people are not exposed to those crises, are not made aware of those crises, or not confronted with them in an embodied enough way, change happens real slow. You know, frustratingly slow for those of us that are, you know, dynamic change makers in the world. But yeah. So anyway, but you know, taro is definitely entering our culture in a bigger way here. Lots of tropical fruits certainly are as well. You know,
Mm-hmm.
soursop is getting more and more recognized and known, and that's because more of them are growing, and more people are getting a chance to try them. And also, we're having more cultures come from other parts of the world here, and it's just like, you've got that fruit, awesome, and then they want to share it with people, and then they
Yeah.
want to make something with it. You know, jackfruits are getting more recognized and used as more people are growing them, and more people start to realize the complexity too. Like, I used to get jackfruits. I always used to get given the sort of sloppy ones. I don't really like them, you know. And once I got exposed to like starchy jackfruits, crunchy, I'm like, this is epic. Like, I can eat vast amounts of this. Like, I can fill
Mm-hmm.
myself up on this
Mm.
and not feel like I've just eaten a whole bunch of like gooey bubble gum, you know, like it feels like really hearty and filling, you know, in a different way for me. Some people love the sloppy ones, but you know, so the more people are continually exposed to different ways of preparing and different varietal nuance, every now and then someone just hits on something and just the right time, the right moment, they're like, that is awesome, you know, and whenever you can reach someone in that way, that's that little step of change that starts to happen. They
Mm.
start to take that inspiration, they get so pumped by it and share it with a few other people. And yeah, it slowly ripples. It slowly ripples.
Well, I'm also curious about your perspective on northern New South Wales as a kind of, well, in many ways, it was the ground zero of the permaculture movement. Like a lot of practitioners moved up to that place in the 70s, created properties, and kind of started spreading the culture. And does it feel like it's reached a kind of critical mass that like you have enough people working on this front, interacting with each other, increasing visibility that it's kind of it's building up enough momentum to kind of really take off. I'm curious because I think up where I am, it's a much smaller region. We're kind of in a narrower band between the coast and inland, and it hasn't been going as long up here. So I'm just curious if you have any kind of sense of history and scale for where you are.
Well, yeah, look, I've got a bit of a sense of history. I mean, I guess my first connection to this region was late 90s, maybe it was like 98 or something like that. And it was actually through doing a permaculture course with Robin Francis in Nimbin.
Hmm.
Um, I was actually studying resource management at university, and I was just like, and pre-internet researching, I was there going through, I ended up seeing in an Earth Guard magazine. I'm like, I knew lots about permaculture. I'd come across lots of books. I'd seen lots of docos. I've heard of people that talked about being permaculture people, but I didn't really know there was any official training or course. I'd never come across such a thing. When I was like, wow, there's like a 12-day course I can do. I can't, and that was sort of my introduction to Northern Rivers world and the permaculture world within it. That was the start of that journey. And so I guess, yeah, and I guess I've been coming and going from the area ever since, and I've been pretty solidly here for about 15 years now. And what I was going to say is I'm speaking from a point now of someone who's hardly left it for about 6 years as well.
Hmm.
So I have a very different perspective to someone like yourself that sits on the outside of that, and because I've been really immersed in this for quite a while, hardly leaving it in that time, and not leaving it a lot in 12 or 15 years. So, but every time I do leave it, I have a very different perspective and appreciation as well.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, like I guess what I can see in that time is that I guess a lot of the pioneer elders are at a point in their life where they're a lot less actively engaging now. They're at that point in their life where they're kind of maturing into their later years and have often well and truly earned the chance to have a bit of a rest and reflection time now in their life, or choose more carefully what they take on. They're not those sort of dynamic people traveling around the world and taking on crazy pioneering projects these days. And a lot of them set up some great spaces and have been great teachers and practitioners. But yeah, amongst those people, there's been lots of people that have set up a whole bunch of stuff, and like you said, have ended up setting a whole bunch of weeds free, haven't managed it well, got overwhelmed, realized it wasn't for them, and left behind stuff that's sort of left a long legacy with bush regenerators. It's been a really negative and confrontational kind of a thing. So there's been quite a bit of my professional life here, particularly in the early days, was around a lot of antagonism between, are you a permie or are you a bush regenerator? And you're one or the other. And if you're one, you're against the other, or you have such a vastly differing worldview that you should either ridicule or be angry at the other or something. Because there was a lot of tension that was there around different ways of land management, and then there was real farmers or permie farmers, I guess there was farmers that were, growing commercial volumes of crops and supplying to marketplaces, and it being the majority of their income or something like that, versus a lot of permies maybe seen as more experimentalists and hobby farmers and not necessarily doing it as a primary production income. So that's kind of the historical perspective, I think, of the early phase of seeing how permaculture was sort of here.
Hmm.
Yeah, so certainly had its role, but definitely wasn't at all integrated in society. It was sort of an antagonistic edge to a number of the sort of existing kind of aspects of society as well. But I think a lot of being part of that countercultural movement, that the introduction of new tropical fruits and interesting flavors, and because there's all the different local markets that things happen here, and people make different cool smoothies out of black sapotes and things like this, and I think it's over time that movement, that influx of people and plants has brought a whole bunch of color and creativity to what was previously an Anglo-centric culture and food production system in a place that doesn't really quite belong.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I guess it's really helped to to start and initiate a lot of a shake up to that sort of colonial food system that was, kind of massacring the landscape and struggling to do well. I mean, I guess what came to work in the long run from the colonial food system here was sugarcane on the low wetlands because it could deal with the waterlogging better than any other crop.
Hmm.
And until the big collapse of the banana industry, bananas on the steep slopes above where it was well drained and above the frost, and everywhere else they wanted to have dairy cattle until the dairy industry and the banana industry both collapsed, within a few years of one another, pretty much.
Hmm.
And then the landscape was open for change, and that's where permaculture came in, and that's where bush regeneration came in. That's where the camphor laurel came in.
Hmm.
Suddenly, two of the major industries of the region, two of the major land uses of the region, everywhere other than the wet flats where the sugarcane is, suddenly the major industries collapsed, and just suddenly it was just open for ecological shifts to happen. And I guess the early hippies and a lot of the early permaculturists were part of the culture that came into that land in flux and change that no longer had major large scale industrial industries on them, and became part of a new collage, a new fabric that kind of started to grow. So there's a bunch of unique circumstances that allowed, I guess, the formation of what is the current, kind of culture of permaculture and land regeneration that's in this particular region. And I think it's fascinating and interesting. But it's gone through a very new, as the whole world has gone through, it's gone through a very new evolution since COVID because, like lots of places, huge amounts of refugees from the city with city real estate money that they've just sold up
Hmm.
have totally changed our landscape and have made it. If people weren't already existing landowner in the area I am, they know that they're out of that market now. And there used to be that and also the big floods a couple of years ago
Yeah,
were a
yeah.
huge hit on housing security. So a lot of the vibrancy and the strength of a lot of the permaculture movement in this area has been like woofers and volunteers, a lot of people that have done rent exchange for work on land and participating in projects and learning from elders in that way. So much of that has just absolutely been decimated by, those events in the last few years. There's been
Interesting.
a huge break in that kind of culture. Which I guess is just another transition that's going on. And I guess there's been because we do have a good backbone of farmers markets here. There's a lot of that direct consumer interface with grower. There is a lot of opportunities for people that want to take diverse and regenerative farming and permacultural ideas if they can translate that into an economically viable way to do primary production. There's definitely a lot of opportunities for that. That's sort of an edge of opportunity here at the moment, but it's usually on rented land because most of those people can't afford that land, and most of the people that own the land often wouldn't consider the economics of
Yeah, yeah.
being a primary producer. Their
If,
money's coming from somewhere
if their
else.
bodies would even be
If
capable
their
of the
bodies were even
workload.
keen to, because a lot of them
Yeah.
have done some of their big years of life and business and they've earned their money. And so either through lack of economic need nor physical capacity, just aren't able to do that work.
Mm.
So we now have that sort of like we've got a great culture, and there's a number of projects that have helped to support that over the years. But we've got so many different great hubs that give opportunities for particularly young, active people that want to make change in the world and be an activist as a food grower. We've got a great space to support those people, but it's gotten a lot tighter in the last few years, basically because of accommodations, the big one.
Do
Um,
you like
had
permaculture originally started around like the limits to growth, the concern that eventually industrial abundance was going to go away.
mm,
And through the 80s and 90s, that kind of got forgotten because there was an economic boom. And I wonder if that sense of precariousness, of unreliability of the industrial system is coming back to the fore. I think particularly during COVID,
Yeah.
people got a sense of how quickly things could disintegrate.
Yeah, no,
Do you feel
that
like people are kind of more aware of the value of permaculture in the general community as to have something in the back pocket? That if we had to roll it out, it would be nice to have a head start on getting those systems working.
Yeah, look, I have to say, like, COVID was a huge boom for my work, having been someone that was already established in the area with projects and well connected, and have managed to have a stable rental home in that whole time, which has been very fortunate for me. That's been what's enabled me to keep doing my work. I haven't been at the whim of all this housing insecurity that so many of my friends have been. So having had a stable base through that time and having already built a foundation to my work, COVID was just a huge boom, really, in both running education, in consultations for people who were really wanting to invest in their own property being a part of their family food security and regional food security. Um, incredible boom for people who were doing this and were ready to engage. I mean, I've worked so hard through the last few years. Like I never imagined I'd work this hard in my life, and
Mm.
I've been pretty burnt out the last couple. I'm slowly regaining my energy again, but I took on a lot because a lot of opportunities came back because there were a lot of people wanting to do this stuff. Um, like once the COVID story, like I've been running lots of courses, like lots of training courses that people run face to face. It's hard to get really big numbers these days. I've ran lots of courses for years, permaculture design courses and weekend courses and stuff where you'd have like, you know, 12 to 20 people would be a kind of, a healthy course. And that's what you sort of build around making it work economically. And it was a good dynamic. You'd have a few people there, trainers working. Um, when the COVID boom kicked in, and people had time and weren't traveling anymore, had the incentive for wanting to do local food security. And a lot of them had government money because they were, getting paid from Centrelink because they weren't able to work anymore. Um, the next course we ran had like 55 enrollments for a face-to-face course. And we had to
Wow.
split it into two groups and run two courses. And so like the awareness that came in our region from that time around precariousness kicked in for people. It got people planning systems in their backyard. It got people thinking about the bigger picture. It got some really great local people to sort of be like, start kicking in to get local veggie boxes happening.
Hmm.
Like going, okay, let's support our local food growers that are out there doing it. Let's get it to people. So some really cool stuff came about then. But I have to say the world moves so quickly these days. And I just feel like, to be honest, a lot of that in people's daily lives and activities, a lot of people have just moved on from that little hiccup.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but what did happen in that time was lots of systems got on the ground, lots of plant material got out there, and lots of people did get exposed to skills, and a lot of them are still doing it. Like I've got to look on the positive side. A huge amount of people are out there doing it, um, but a lot of people did start a lot of systems, and they're now back traveling. They're not maintaining them as well, or they've sort of worked out, oh, it's actually not that important anymore. So yes, it was a huge boom, and ultimately, I hope that every future shake-up can keep on kicking people in a little bit more, because that is one of the motivating factors that can help people. Is a bit of that fear of the unknown, and a bit of that change can be an important stimulus for people to change. But I hope also people can find change through just following their instinctual connection to following healthy life force as well,
Mm.
and vibrant life force, and following that rather than being lured by all the other distractions that could be there in the world that could take them away from that.
Mm. I,
So
I
yeah,
have
but yeah,
Well,
it's
I have a general question to kind of round up the culture section.
yeah,
From the very beginning, permaculture like shone a light on the culture side of the equation. It wasn't just gardening. It wasn't
mm,
just growing food. Right in the foundation. They were very aware that like connecting people and organizing people was a key ingredient. And I wonder if you have any reflections on like what permaculture like has done right on that front that you have seen in practice that's actually working and looks like it can continue to be built on.
Good question. I mean, I guess people got lots of experiences of what their experience of permaculture has been. For me, I think one of the great things that's come through the permaculture movement is still that really strong there is a celebration of life and diversity. Um, like we said before about you know, the colonial Anglo kind of food system in Australia. That sort of foundation. It's like um, the permaculture movement's been able to bring, to that as an example, like color and life and opportunity and examples from cultures around the world, celebrating other cultural ways of being. Like I think bringing a sense of open-mindedness and possibility and positive intention for the future is just a huge cultural uh, boom and support for me. Just to keep maintaining optimistic worldview and with practical techniques where people can take an engaging role as a positive steward in the world. Like that's huge, and permaculture's just given so many people so many skills in that and opened so many people to that, just even that possibility. Like I know for me, permaculture, before I ever saw anything that looked like a diverse polycultural system of any scale, just seeing drawings and photographs in books was huge for me, just to open my mind to see that the landscape could be engaged with in a way completely differently to what I was seeing in my world around me in in rural lands of Western Sydney and urban front yards and backyards and things like that. Like just to share information and ideas and excitement of other ways of being and celebrate differences as positive is and something to be explored with curiosity and interest is a huge offering to culture. So I think on a bigger and a philosophical and a worldview level, that's just a massive contribution. And I think on a practical level, just you know, one crop at a time, one building design at a time. Change can slowly happen. But yeah, I, I guess my relationship to permaculture has definitely been more around like because I haven't had the opportunity thus far to build my house, although I now have shares in a piece of land and I have that opportunity in the near future, which is really exciting.
Mm.
Um, but I haven't had the opportunity to build a house. I haven't had the opportunity before to design a township, or any of the kind of bigger material goals that permaculture design can offer. All I've been able to do is work in areas that I have some legitimate access to for a given period of time and do my best to grow food and build soil and leave a successional kind of legacy behind if someone else cares enough for it to not destroy it after I leave. Like that's sort of been as much as I've been able to contribute on that level. But on the social and community level, just by doing that and just by engaging with everyone I get a chance to engage with that and hopefully leave the majority of them with some positive impacts from that, that's the most I can do. And that's been hugely inspired by, the permies before me and the people out there sharing those skills, one at a time.
What do you think about like the organizational impact of the PDC of having like a semi-formalized structure for spreading instruction and knowledge?
Look, I think it's really cool. I think been an amazing thing. Like certainly for me, like I did my PDC, like I said, with Robin Francis as an intensive, in the middle of one of the very early degrees in science degrees, majoring in resource and environmental management. Like there weren't many of those things at the time, but I was studying one.
Mm.
And for me to do that 12 days of training absolutely just blew me away. Like to have spent my life
being a part of building buildings, growing gardens, studying at university, resource environmental management, but not even having a basic foundation of like passive solar design or simple understandings of the way the sun moves at different times of the day and different times of the year, and the huge ramification that has on photosynthesis and the building materials you use. There was a whole bunch of things that is just so simple and foundational in that even from someone like myself that spent a big focus on trying to learn things in nature in all different ways, just the way that PDC delivered some of that information just absolutely reoriented my way of being. And I think hugely profound. And I know seeing so many people go through it, having taught in many of them and having got to know many people going through that process, to see so many people go through a really profound anchoring into some fundamentals of earth science, and I think some just material and ecological realities that you just don't get access to in so many other ways. So I think it's a really efficient and awesome package, the way it can deliver that. I think it's really interesting to see, and it's really important to see how that can evolve and needs to evolve over time and space as people's changes, evolve. Like, so when I did that course in my early days of teaching in PDCs, there was no internet. So you're actually delivering information then. That was important, delivering information and experience. But the actual delivery of information was an extremely important part of that. And to me, I had nowhere else to access that information in such a condensed and valuable form. But now the information's everywhere and in multiple formats, in multiple ways. And so I personally, the way I've transitioned, the way I do my training, not specifically as PDCs, but certainly within PDCs I teach, is just more and more hands-on engagement and less on the theory. The theory can be delivered in links. The theory's out there and accessed in all sorts of ways. What people need, I think, more and more these days is just deep embodied involvement in systems, doing stuff, hands-on skills, experiencing different stages of succession of evolved permaculture systems, and getting a chance with all their senses to take that in and engage with it. And it's getting harder to get those courses happening for a lot of people because there's so many cheap or free online versions where people think they're getting the same thing and they're getting it cheap and easy. And it's easy to deliver to people an online format because it can be done at self-paced learning, and there's so many great benefits that offers. But yeah, I guess I've chosen the route to keep on doing the hands-on, the intimate engagement stuff. And I think we need to keep a balance of both of those things. As that information becomes more accessible, we need to keep on making sure we're providing, really, really sensory, deeply integrated experience for people too, so that it's not just a thing of like another intellectual experience. Yeah, I've done that. I've got that. I know how that works,
Do you think decentralizing the certification was a net positive to the permaculture movement, that it wasn't all locked up in one, dusty old institution that said nobody else can offer a permaculture course?
Yeah, I think it probably was. I think it probably is I think it's probably the essence of how permaculture's evolved, for better or worse. It is the
Mm.
very essence of the nature of how things have worked.
You
And again,
definitely
it
hear
reflects.
some criticism that some courses are better than others.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, and look, that's like I was just going to refer back to, like, because we're in the cowboy phase of syntropics too. Like,
Mm.
it's the same story in syntropics. Like, there is actually no format around that to be there's no accreditation to be a syntropics teacher. There's no particular format of any course that's run by any institution. It's the same story going on. So we're seeing the early phase of that, cowboy phase of that happening. But like I said, it's happening in a different way because now those people have online platforms and global markets at their fingertips, which if you can make a sexy website, you can make a lot of money, and there's people making a lot of money. And not to say they don't have something valuable to offer, but they don't necessarily have the experience of some of the people that have been doing that stuff for 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, the
But they might be
incentives and the
making a shitload
dynamics and
more
the
money and
networks.
accessing a lot more people,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So
It's a very different dynamic, and the incentives, like the size of the prize that people are grabbing for is different.
yeah, yeah. So again, so because the early days of permaculture had a slower movement, um, I know my understanding, I suspect that it's not quite it's probably formed a little bit more. I mean,
Like organically and authentically. Yeah.
yeah,
It grew
authentically,
to, yeah,
people had to build an audience from respect from their work,
yeah.
before you had an internet to
Do,
show a particular perspective of yourself you'd like to show the world,
yeah.
true or not.
Do you think syntropics will end up being absorbed into the permaculture umbrella as just another more detailed agroforestry technique rather than
Well,
the reverse?
Well, look, that's been my approach personally,
Mm,
and so like, yeah, I from what I understand, that the course that I was in, the 2 4-day courses that I was in, the 8 days of training I did in that syntropics, it was actually the first English speaking syntropic course, I believe, in the world, and it was the first one taught outside of Brazil, or maybe Brazil and Portugal, maybe outside of Portuguese
mm,
speaking nations. So that was very much the forefront of syntropics coming into a bigger world. That particular course. So the politics that unrolled after that was fascinating to be in amongst, and
mm,
very interesting journey. But all those things were being discussed amongst that core group, and those of us who disseminated and shared some of that stuff from there. But because I was already an established permaculture teacher, and I was teaching in not just PDCs, but like accredited Cert 3 and Cert 4 trainings through the Byron Community College here. Like, um, I had a template that I was already teaching permaculture, and I saw how there were some really valuable tools that I could integrate into that, particularly with integrating into particularly food forestry, really, that aspect of permaculture. So to me, I already had a foundation of permaculture as a broad, social, economic, and ecological approach to being and relating to the world. And to me, I saw syntropics as a really valuable, detailed technique to bring into that worldview. That's my personal approach to syntropics.
yeah. Yeah.
Some people had a very different approach to syntropics, particularly if they didn't have a background already in other forms of food forestry or land management, where they had sometimes even a dogmatic or spiritual or even religious kind of connection to it, in a way where it was sort of like where it would where my relationship of engaging it with permaculture was even blasphemous, or disrespectful, like it's like, no, that's not permaculture, that's syntropics, so there was a lot of the preciousness around what was what. And I guess most of my professional work journey since then has been around dialoguing a lot of that stuff with people who are like, oh, you're a syntropics guy, or you're a permaculture guy. I'm like, well, do I have to be one or the other?
Yeah. Yeah.
Although I feel like they both speak aspects of a core truth, but certainly for me, permaculture is a much broader template to work within, and syntropics offers some really valuable insight, and I see that slotting into a system of permaculture. And I'm sure there's people out there with syntropics that are probably doing the same in a reverse way, and they certainly are. There's a lot of people that are like, I'm a syntropic guy, and particularly if they were already had allegiance to Brazil as well, because there's a lot of pride that's come from out of Brazilian culture, and it's expressed itself so well in Brazilian culture, and is so celebrated in current Brazilian culture, which is so awesome. But so particularly a lot of the Brazilians that have come to syntropics, and maybe that's been their first connection to growing in that, should justifiably feel a lot of pride that that's a really unique,
Do you know,
system that's
do you
evolved.
know what this reminds me of?
Yeah.
It's the Australian bunya and the Brazilian piranha pine. That
Let's bring them
they're
together.
sisters, and that they can be cross-pollinated
They
to
are.
strengthen and deepen both of them.
Absolutely. Hey, that's beautiful. Look at that. You're writing the metaphors beautifully. I love it.
No, we
Yeah.
should probably wrap up with this. Has got a bit longer than I was expecting, but I hope you're having fun.
I'm
My
having fun.
final fun question I love asking everyone: if you could wave a magic wand and create a new life form, what would you wish into existence to share with the world?
Oh, right. I saw you write that one before. If I was to, wow. If I was to have a magic wand and create something into existence, a being into existence,
Yeah, yeah, a new living thing.
a new living thing. Wow. Um, like I got a feeling that in some ways, it's about maybe integrating more fungi into more of the living things that already exist and letting fungi have more of a say in evolution, perhaps. Um,
Ah,
I know it's in there and it's in there doing its thing, but I somehow feel like uh, a lot of my relationship to agriculture has been like plants and animals, right?
hmm.
And it's sort of ignored an entire kingdom. And I feel like there's a kingdom there that's been in my cultural experience has been undervalued and underutilized. And I feel like I'm letting that life force into my life in a new way. And I'm kind of excited to see, rather than bringing a new creation into life, I'm excited to see what embracing more of that kingdom brings to the richness of the life that I live and the ecosystems that I'm within. So it's maybe not a super kind of creative answer to your question in terms of coming from my imagination of something new and what it could be, but that's where it's at for me. Is more about um, embracing embracing the relationships of what we have and seeing how we can support them to grow something new that is a poly poly being that is a that is a greater beingness through relationship. Yeah, yeah.
Fungi are really interesting because they're so exacting in the conditions that they want that it's not like an animal you can just put a fence around it or tie a rope around
Mm,
its neck and make it put up with conditions that aren't quite to its liking. I mean, even with plants, you can kind of force them to grow in places a wild plant it wouldn't be its first choice of where it would live. But with fungi, like they'll just melt into the wind if they're
mm.
not happy with the deal that you're offering them. So, but yeah, I can see enormous potential for that family if we become more sensitive and more aware of the impact that we have on the world around us, that we could welcome them into the human family to a much greater extent than we currently do.
Yeah, well, they're my growing edge, I guess, in terms of my fascination with ecosystems. It's like, for me, like when I go snorkeling on a reef or something, or if I have that sort of beautiful experience, I
Hmm.
love that because, like, I'm not trying to name shit. I'm not trying to know what it's doing, how it's engaging. I'm just looking at the beauty of it. I'm just going, this is amazing. And fungi have kind of been that for me. They've been mysterious and bizarre and amazing in the landscape. And I'm only just beginning to engage with them in a way of starting to go, oh, what is this guy? What is its needs? How could I support it more? How could I inoculate? How could I bring that fungi into my system?
Yeah.
And
And
how long is it going to last? So where's it going to move to? And
and so many connections with agroforestry, particularly in tropical
absolutely,
climates that I mean, there's a few established temperate zone tree fungus relationships with humans in the mix, but yeah, the tropical zone, the subtropical zone, we haven't even begun, I think.
there's
Or there might be cultural traditions that we are, even more disconnected from, that there's potential there.
yeah, there's a world of opportunity. So I think that's sort of an exciting phase of like integrating more fungi into the super organism that is life.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Now, we're going to have to wrap up there. Now, if people want to learn more about what you're doing, what's the best place that they can follow up?
Well, I've got a website, Growing Roots Permaculture. So it's growingrootspermaculture.com. That sort of has a bit of information around some of the projects I've been a part of. I actually haven't updated it for a long time, I have to say, but there's some interesting sort of pics and a few stories around some of the projects I'm doing. That's also where I will upload information around trainings I'm doing. So when I'm doing new trainings, I put them up on there. Um, that's the best place to probably engage. I'm not engaging a lot with social media these days, to be honest. So I have had other members of the team that have been really good at doing that, but I've sort of let that slip a bit lately, and I'm just enjoying more intimate connections with people. But people can contact me via that. If people are interested to kind of know more about what I do and want to have a yarn or know about other projects I do or opportunities to engage, they can contact me via the website. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Bunya, thank you so much for what has been a really fascinating, in-depth conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much too, Simon. Really enjoyed the chance to connect with you.
Check out my Substack to read more about my own experimental farm. All posts are free for the first week, but a paid subscription unlocks the archive of past posts and supports my work. Bunya has a dynamic agroforestry course starting on April 30th for a few days. Sign up to quick start your understanding of syntropic techniques. Next week, I'll be talking to prolific, independent ecological journalist and author Fred Pearce.